Shalom, Israel. We're back, and we are talking about living for Him. And we're looking at four key aspects of the believer's life that we're trying to develop so we can walk like Messiah. And we're looking at the heart, the mind, the words, and our actions. For we've already talked about how really the heart generates what's going to be in our mind. And what we're thinking about is going to come out of our mouth. And what we're talking, what words are coming out of our mouth, we're going to end up doing those actions with our hands and feet. Well, today we're going to dive into this a little bit deeper, and we're going to look at the heart, because really the heart is where it's at. And in the scripture, in the book of Proverbs, chapter 4, verse 23, it is written, "Watch over your heart with all diligence, for out of it are the sources of life." And that's what we're going to be looking at today, because in order to have life, we've got to look at this heart. Really, this is dealing with the first and second commandment of understanding who Yahuwah is and having no one before Him, making no idols. That He should have our heart, and nothing else should be before Him. It's also written in the book of Matthew, in chapter 15, verse 18 through 20. But what comes out of the heart, or what comes out of the mouth, comes from the heart, and these defile the man. For out of the heart come forth wicked reasoning, murders, adulteries, whorings, thefts, false witnessing, slander, and these defile the man. But to eat with unwashed hands does not defile the man. So Messiah is saying, really from our heart, these words is coming from here. This is the source for everything else here. This is the source for evil reasoning. This is the source for bad actions. So this works both ways. If you're doing evil, you're meditating on it. You're thinking about it. Your words are evil, and your actions are going to be evil. So to truly be regenerated, it needs to start at a heart level. And this is no surprise, because Messiah in Mark, when we think about when he asked what was the first and the great command, the most principal command, in Mark chapter, I believe it's 12. Let me get there real quick. Mark 12, 29 and 30. And Yahusha answered him, "The first of all commands is, Hear, O Israel, Yahuwah our Elohim, Yahuwah is one. And you shall love Yahuwah your Elohim with all your heart, and with all your being, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the first command." So the primary commandment is loving Yah with all our heart. And in the Torah, it also mentions the same thing multiple times. I'll just read one here real quick. In the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 10, starting in verse 12. "Now Israel, what is Yahuwah your Elohim asking of you, but to fear Yahuwah your Elohim, to walk in all His ways, and to love Him, and serve Yahuwah your Elohim with all your heart, with all your being, to guard the commands of Yahuwah and His laws, which I command you today for your good." So we see that even in the Torah, it's about really at a heart level loving Yah and keeping His commandments. And we see this, this is really, because the next question is, well, how do we love Yah? And we're told in the book of John 14, verse 15, "And if you love me, you shall guard my commands." This is Yahushua Messiah. And he also says this in John 15, verses 9 and 10. "As the Father has loved me, I have also loved you. Stay in my love." And we've already talked about this, but how do we stay in His love? If you guard my commands, you shall stay in my love, even as I have guarded my Father's commands and stay in his love. So loving Yah, his love language, is obedience to his instructions. And we'll get a little bit more into how we keep these commandments next time, but today we're really focusing on just what needs to go into the heart today. And one of the best places in Scripture to look at is Messiah's teaching on the sower and the seed. And I'll just pull up a little drawing here. This may be helpful as we go through this. Now, of all the parables, it's this parable that Messiah talks about, and I'm going to just get there real quick, in the book of Mark, that we really need to know to understand all the rest of the parables. There's a lot of parables in the Scripture, and we really need to understand this one to unlock what's going on. So in the book of Mark, chapter 4, get there here real quick, verse 13, and he said to them, "Do you not understand this parable? How then shall you understand all parables?" Basically saying, if you don't understand this parable of the sower and the seed, you're not going to understand anything else he's talking about. So this is a foundational parable that we need to wrap our minds around. And many of you have read the sower and the seed, so I'm not going to read every scripture on this. It's recorded in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and each one gives a little bit different detail. And what we have is basically 4 levels of ground. We have the wayside, the rocky places, the thorny ground, and the good ground. Now, just real briefly, remember, there's a sower that goes out and sows the seed. And it's important to understand this seed represents the word of Elohim. That's Luke 8:11. And really, the ground represents our heart. And that's why we're talking about this today, because we want to have, if we want to have the end fruit, we have to look at the heart. And that's what this is all about. And this parable really gets into this quite deeply. All these grounds represent different types of hearts and the word that's being sown there. So on the wayside, the word, this group hears the word. As a matter of fact, in each one of these groups, everyone hears the word, but they're going to have different responses based off their heart condition. First group hears the word, but as soon as it's sown, the devil comes and snatches that word away, so they don't become fruitful. They won't believe the word. And remember, the word of Elohim includes every word that comes out of the mouth of Yah. So they're not going to believe this because the devil comes and snatches it away from them, so they would be believed and be saved, as the scripture says. So they produce no fruit. That's not what we want to be doing. The second ground is the rocky ground. And this is where the believers, or I should say, the hearers, they hear the word again, and they receive it with joy. You know, they're excited about the good news, you know. And this crop springs up fast, but it's among the rocks, so it doesn't really have much ground. And it doesn't have any root. And it says that it has no moisture. Well, we'll get into that a little bit more later, but it springs up, but persecution comes, representing the sun, and it's beating down on this little plant. And again, when persecution comes, they turn away. So they don't stay. They don't have that staying power to stay with Messiah. And they, as the scripture says, they fall away. So the first group doesn't believe to be saved. The second group has an initial kind of excitement, but they fall away from the faith. Both of these grounds produce no fruit. The whole goal of being with Messiah is to bear much fruit. John 15 talks about this. We also have the thorns, the thorny ground. So these also hear the word. They hear the word of Elohim. You know, and they start to actually produce a plant. And unfortunately, there's other things in their life representing thorns that literally choke the word so it does not profit. It does not bear fruit. The whole point of a seed is to bear fruit. And if it doesn't bear fruit, it's pretty much useless. And these things that choke it are the deceit of riches, other things, and the cares of this world. And later on in the parables, we also understand that the enemy, Satan, the devil, is also sowing seed. And this could be another thing that's maybe tied into this thorny ground that's mentioned in Messiah's other parables. But long story short, this group also is distracted with so many things, they end up bearing no fruit. He literally can choke the word of Elohim that was sown in their heart. Then we have the good soil, which is those who hear it, accept it, understand the word, and put it into practice. They actually become doers of the word. And they bear fruit. Some 30, some 60, some 100-fold. And this is really where we want to be. Because when we look at this, not that there's percentages here, but 75% heard the word, but they bore no fruit. And I think this percentage today is even higher. There's many people that have heard the word, and they're bearing no fruit. And we're going to find out on the day of judgment when we stand before the King. Because if we're not hearing the word of Elohim, and it's not going into our heart and changing us, and we're producing good fruit, then, we're distracted. We're not connected to the true vine. We need to have this good root system and be connected to the root. We need to have that moisture as well.